The Perth disaster is heading east. Martin North and John Adams in the interests of the people. Hi John, good to see you again.
Hello mate.
And we have a very special guest on today.
Yes, we have the Honourable Charles Smith, MLC, who's a member of the Western Australian Parliament. He has decided to join us. I was in Perth last week. I got to spend 5 days in Perth. Got to see a lot of different suburbs around property, around mortgage stress. You gave me some data around which suburbs to go through. I had some local people on the ground also showing me a number of things to be able to go see. There was a number of people I was able to meet, and I was able to meet a few people from the Western Australian Parliament who gave me some local perspectives. And Charles was one of them. Charles has been watching the show for a while and been following me on social media. So it was good to meet face to face and trade notes. Why I think Charles is good to interview. Charles is a former police officer. He used to work in Kalgoorlie. He actually lives in the sort of the Ellenbrook Vines area, which is in northeast Perth, which is actually one of the areas in your survey sample that says that has high levels of mortgage stress. And obviously he's in Parliament, and he's been in Parliament for a couple of years. He was elected as a One Nation candidate, and quite famously a few weeks ago he decided to quit One Nation, and now he sits as an independent. But given that he's in Parliament, he has a unique perspective on politics and public policy, from the economic to the social. So I thought it'd be good to get Charles's perspectives.
Great, Charles, and welcome to the show, and thank you very much for spending some time with us. It really appreciate
Thanks, guys. Delighted to be here.
So we've got a few thoughts in terms of areas we'd like to explore, Charles. But would you like just to sort of give your own introduction in terms of, a little bit about where you've come from and what's really driving your agenda at the moment? I think that's a really good place to start.
Sure. So I came to Australia in 2005, where I came into the police force in Perth, and I served in Perth. Then I went out to Kalgoorlie Boulder, where I actually stopped and lived for 10 years. So that gave me a great insight into how the regions worked. I then came back where I got into politics. I then joined the National Party in Western Australia, before moving on from them to run with One Nation. So that's where I am today. I'm sitting in the Parliament. I represent the East Metropolitan Region, which is a very, very big region, around 400,000 people, very, very diverse. And that's where I am today. And that's where I met John, and we talked about all those issues that are of a big concern for us both.
Right, and so that region would cover everything from reasonable sized cities through to a large rural constituency too, right?
That's right. It has the inner city regions where we have high density developments and suburbs, out to semi-rural regions as well.
Okay, great. So can we then just talk a little bit about the real estate market in Perth? Because we know that things are looking a bit wobbly. Prices have dropped on average 20%. And we know that there are areas which are probably really filling at the moment. Are you seeing that in your constituencies?
Well, if you drive around the suburbs like Ellenbrook up into the Vines and those surrounding areas, you can certainly see plenty of properties for sale. And it's probably worth noting that if you're a regular traveller in that region, the properties are staying for sale for a long time. I don't know what the end results are, what if people have come in and they've accepted a low offer, but they are taking a long time to move. So that's a visible, noticeable thing when you drive around the area.
Right, and so do you see some of the implications more broadly then, if you like, the pressure on households because of the fact that property prices have dropped and people are trying to sell and can't? Is it spilling over more broadly?
Well, I think it spills over into all sorts of issues, and we touched on those social issues. And Perth and Western Australia has the dubious honour of being Australia's meth capital, and it's a serious issue which sort of undermines the whole of society here. For example, if you were in the police and you dealt with people, I think 90% plus people would be meth affected. It's a serious social hazard that's coming from the economic downturn. I think one of the bigger issues in Western Australia is employment or the unemployment levels. That's really a big concern of mine and something I don't think the government here is really addressing.
Right. So unemployment's been rising, hasn't it? And particularly younger employment looks to be very high at the moment.
Yeah, so unemployment here is nudging around 7%. And as you mentioned, youth rates, if we talk about underutilisation rates among 15 to 24-year-olds, they're nudging on 30%. The kids just cannot get jobs in the marketplace. And it's not just for people leaving school, it's for people graduating, people who are postgraduates. They can't get jobs in those desired fields that they trained for. So they're leaving university with buckets of debt and they cannot get professional level jobs. It's a real problem for them. And I know kids who've been looking for 5-6 years and they just cannot get a job.
So is that a policy failing in terms of the Western Australian government or something else that's created that issue, do you think?
Well, I think we can examine national policy and state policy to look for those answers. And when the McGowan government first came into power in 2017, they initially took Perth out of the state migration scheme, which was a good thing, reducing population pressures. Shortly thereafter, they then decided to turbocharge the international student market. And then they now have targets for 100,000 international students within the next few years. And this is, I think, a significant reason why wages are declining and the kids cannot get jobs.
Right, so there's more competition for the jobs that are there, is that what you're saying?
The market is already saturated and they're introducing even more people into that oversaturated market. And we know that has the effect of driving wages lower. These kids come over, international students and for other foreign workers, they undercut the marketplace. So what we have now in Western Australia is people who are just undercutting each other consistently to try and get the job. So that's just driving wages down across the whole country, really.
Sure. So, Charles, I mean, in terms of some of the observations that I saw while I was there, and obviously besides you, I met other members of the WA Parliament. So obviously we have property prices falling about 20% since 2014. And the Reserve Bank says that 15% of mortgages in WA they're underwater, but that's calculated at a portfolio level. When you look at a property by property level, it's actually a lot higher than that. Obviously we have parts of Perth which have high levels of mortgage stress, according to Martin's own data. And so all of these factors plus a tough employment market is obviously leading to a whole host of very nasty social problems. So you touched on the drug problem, and I've heard that from other members of the WA Parliament who said that not just in the Ellenbrook Vines area, but even on along the coast, Iluka, Hillary's, even going up to Oceans Reef and Condley and some of these areas, those problems are playing out. You're seeing things of, in quite a few cases, car repossessions happening, children being withdrawn from private schools. Obviously, one of the things that I was told before I went to Perth from a viewer of ours was that, there wasn't a big visible homeless problem in the Perth CBD. So last Saturday night, I was actually in Perth, in the CBD, and I walked the streets around midnight just to sort of see with my own eyes. And obviously there was homeless people there. And to be honest, I wasn't particularly shocked because I've seen more homeless in Sydney compared to Perth. But what I was told was 5 years ago at the peak, when things were really roaring in WA, there was hardly any homeless on the streets of Perth. So it's much more visible. And obviously we're starting to see a high level of divorce, and obviously even with suicide with mining fly in fly out workers. So these were some of the broad things that were sort of said to me, so we're seeing that a whole host of bad economic policies is now manifesting itself into some very nasty social problems. So that'd be fair to say from your observation.
I would agree. Being a politician, I speak to lots of people. In this area, we have quite a few psychologists and psychiatry businesses, and those people tell me that they are overrun with people, especially from fly-in, fly-out backgrounds, who are struggling to cope with that work style, the family breakdown, the drug use. It's a serious social issue, and the Edinburgh area is very high in fly-in, fly-out families, and that knock-on effect goes down to the children, how they behave in schools, and so on. Our schools around in this area have incredibly high levels of classroom disruption. The children can be quite antisocial. And these are all knock-on effects of the unemployment, the underemployment, and the low-wage economy that we're all living in now. These are real social problems. And as you said, homelessness, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see anybody on the streets in Perth. Now we do.
And one of the pieces of data that I've noticed is the rise in the caseload of counsellors, and particularly debt counsellors as well, because of the financial pressures. Are you seeing that in your constituency?
I haven't got directly involved with that, but I've noticed the increase in these short-term loan companies coming through the last 5 years or so, who come in on these payday loans, and that again is another symptom of people not having enough money just to get through the week. And there's also this phenomenon of people now requiring to work more than one job. People are having to get 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs, just to get through the working week. And these are all, again, symptoms of the low-wage economy that we now operate in.
Well, certainly we measure mortgage stress, which basically is looking at money coming in and money going out. And in the West, mortgage stress is very high. And one of the issues that comes out, as you say, is multiple part-time jobs often, including gig economy jobs, which are quite low paid. And also that the debt levels over there with people who are in mortgage stress tend to have higher levels of other debts as well, including payday loans. So the whole financial edifice begins to crumble as they try to manage this. So my question is, it's a fairly obvious set of financial and social issues. Is enough being done, do you think, to sort of address them, or are there additional levers that should be being pulled?
Well, look, I note from earlier interviews, John, you mentioned government policies throwing the kitchen sink at the housing situation or the economic situation. One of the things the McGowan government is doing here is with this so-called Keystart loan scheme in a bid to reflate or to provide stimulus to the housing market. And Keystart is a government-backed, really subprime scheme designed to suck in these marginal borrowers into the housing market. And these ministers are on television saying now is a great time to buy property. And they're doing everything they can to get that market going by sucking in these people who would not normally be able to afford and repay a mortgage. And I've been heavily critical of that in Parliament and through my media releases.
Well, that's very interesting because, of course, if you look over to the US prior to the global financial crisis, they had precisely the same policies going on there, where effectively, towards the end of the late cycle, more and more subprime borrowers were being sucked into the market on the promise of getting a property and being able to own their dream, as it were. But unfortunately, it turned sour there, and we suspect the similar is going to be here, because essentially we're pulling people into the market who probably shouldn't get into the market. It's also having an impact in terms of house prices continuing to rise and banks lending ever more. So effectively it's a bit of a dead end in my view.
Well, I think it's quite amazing that barely 6-7 months have gone by from the Royal Commission into the banking sector, and we've got banks falling over themselves to provide loans to these people. And it's exactly that policy, as you said, which led to the global financial crisis. And Australia seems to be sleepwalking down that path, and I don't understand why.
So I mean, that's interesting you say that, Charles, because a lot of our viewers don't understand why parliaments, the federal parliament, some of the state parliaments, they're doing what they're doing. Sometimes I'm scratching my head. You're in parliament. So when you say you're not sure why the government's doing what it's doing, well, obviously I'm assuming you're talking to other parliamentarians. What's being discussed in the private hallways on some of these issues among yourself and in terms of the crossbench and the government and the opposition?
Well, with respect to my parliamentary colleagues, I mean, I appear to be a lone voice of sanity in that place and reason, with the major parties really in cahoots with each other, mostly, I think, to push these kind of policy ideas forward. And I know that in private conversations with members on both sides of the House, they are agreeing with what I'm saying. But of course, due to the way politics works and party lines works, they can't publicly say, yeah, Charles, I think what you're saying is actually correct, and I agree with what you're saying. So I think having an independent voice and, if you like, saying the truth is I'm having some little influence in there. I mean, hopefully it goes back to their party rooms. But, I've been speaking about the wages, the housing issues, and maybe a little change does go down. I mean, one can only hope that my lone voice of reason is having some effect. And I think I do have some effect because, John, I've noticed in all the media that I do and gets released, it oftentimes becomes mainstream news some weeks or months down the track. And if we just cast our minds back to the Key Start policy initiative, just a few weeks after my media went out, the West, the paper here in WA, ran a big article on Key Start and the pitfalls that go with it. So I like to think I'm having some effect and influence, but I'm not being directly recognised for doing so. But as long as something is happening, I guess that's the main thing.
Sure.
The news is getting out.
Sure. Charles, so when I spoke to other members of the WA Parliament, I mean, I was hearing a recognition that there was a common set of problems that we're discussing here now, that other people in Parliament recognise that there are problems. But are you finding that there's consensus about how to deal with the problems, or what the government and the opposition don't want to sort of face facts and actually come to a mature deliberation about the solution, or there's just an ideological divide as to how do we actually resolve this other than getting more people into debt?
Well, that's the only policy initiative that's come forward on housing. I mean, there's no real policy about how we logically reduce house pricing or how we make them more affordable. So the first-time home buyers can get onto the market and we can have a reasonable structured market in place.
Sure, but I guess just separate to housing, when you look at sort of in terms of unemployment or youth unemployment, when you're looking at crime, when you're looking at the drug problem, the homelessness problem, I mean, is the government, is the opposition starting to think seriously about, well, we actually have a problem today, we need to do something about it before it gets worse? Is policy the policy solution? Is there a mature conversation in Parliament about how do we get bipartisanship to actually address the problems happening on the streets of Perth?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, we're not addressing the policing or crime situation at all. Government refuses to recruit additional police and invest into the justice services. In fact, I think they're doing the opposite. They're slowly sort of walking away from crime and policing. Again, I'm at a loss to explain why that should be. But if you examine Labor governments, it seems to be a common trait that they cut back on crime and law and order issues. In terms of employment, we do have some mine construction going on in the regions. I understand it's going to be creating a few thousand jobs. In Perth itself, we still have the fly in, fly out economy going. In addition to that, John, they're trying to encourage local contractors to employ locals. I don't think that's being particularly successful. I know they've asked government contractors to look at how they can employ more West Australians. At least that's a start. Again, how well that is succeeding is yet to be seen. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we just have to really look inward more to see how we can employ local people before we employ people from outside the state, for example. And only yesterday, John, the government came out and said how great they are offering visas to people from East Timor to come and pick fruit and vegetables in Western Australia. Why not employ local people? I just don't get it.
Sure. So the message I'm hearing from you, Charles, is there's a lot of policy gaps, and basically there's no serious approach to public policy to address not only the problems that Western Australia and Perth have today, but to stop these problems from getting worse.
Exactly right. They're not really addressing the major underlying issues.
Yeah. So because I used to work in federal parliament as an advisor, I mean that doesn't surprise me because I mean obviously Martin and I have done some recent shows about the federal parliament, and we're just saying that the underlying national problem around household debt and the bubble, Parliament's not doing anything about it. So the fact that we're seeing this happen, from your perspective at the WA level, I mean that doesn't surprise me at all. So obviously. I'm assuming there are obviously quite a few Western Australians who know who you are. A lot of people on the East Coast and in South Australia and Tasmania wouldn't know who you are. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show with you was to help tell the Western Australian story, because if the East Coast unravels like the West Coast is, we're going to start to see bad economic problems. We're going to start to see bad social problems. We're going to see these gaps in public policy, and governments basically have no idea what they should be doing. So for people on the East Coast who've never been to Western Australia or who haven't been to Western Australia in quite a while, do you have any sort of key messages about how either, if you want to talk to other parliamentarians or other policymakers or even individual Australians about how they should be thinking about the property bubble, the debt bubble, how should they sort of getting on top of these issues before their circumstances unravel into some sort of big mess?
I think policymakers we need to start rejecting. I mean, the globalised approach to economics. We have to step away from it and look inwards. I think, and we have to start. Australia as a nation, including WA, we have to start making things again, John. And because we've seen those manufacturing jobs completely crumble away. In terms of how we avoid the debt, John, it's an incredibly difficult question to answer. And I'm not sure what the answers would be for the eastern states, but to tighten our belts, diversify our income streams and invest in diversified asset bases. I think that's the best advice we can give to individual people, and get more skills, because if the jobs go, if the low wages come through, then it's all hands on deck, John. It really is.
Well, Charles, I really appreciate your time tonight, and I know John does too. And your perspectives are immensely valuable, not least because I think people on the East Coast can learn a lot from what's going on over in the West and what's been going on. So thank you very much for your time. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Sure. Well, I'm on the social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I have a website, charlessmithmlc.com. And I usually do answer all questions and queries put to me within a reasonable time frame.
Your service level
Max.
sounds very good. Charles, that's great. Thank you very much for your time today. And we'll be very interested to see how things play out in the West ahead.
So do I. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.